So I wanted to tell some stories relating to the release of Nevermind and surrounding that year. Now, without looking at a timeline, I may be off by dates, so I'm not going to try to just look and I'm going to go by what I remember um, around the dates being. I may be off a little bit, but probably not much. Anyway, so we're going to go back to early 91. Um, so Kurt, Chris, Shelley, and Tracy came over to visit the House of Rock. And Chris would come over quite often at that time. Kurt was kind of jumping around. He lived various different places, so I didn't really see Kurt very often in '91. Uh, like I was saying, once he moved out of the apartment that he had with Tracy in Olympia, I didn't talk to him or see him very much. It was only at shows or really once in a while. You know, it's pretty much only shows. But Chris and Shelley lived in Tacoma, and I was in pretty consistent communication with Chris at that point. Like he'd come over and visit the House of Rock. Uh, Shit, man. Like seemed like he was over there every week. He was just like one of the random friends that would show up. You know, it was kind of a, well, I want to say party house. I don't really mean we had big parties, but there was just a lot of people would come over. You know, that was just like one of those places. There was a total of 3 bands at one point, I think, practicing there. So it was kind of a, you know, it was um, a musician collective, you know, drinking, um, all the stuff that goes along with that. Anyway, lots of stories. So those guys came over and just we all hung out and had some food and I remember at one point Kurt asked me if I had any weed. Surprisingly, he doesn't really ask me that very often. I got stoned with him only a couple times, um, and I said yes, and went down to this little. I lived in, basically it was like it was a washroom originally, but it had like an old sink in there, and I had just turned it into like a little bedroom, so it was really small. Yeah, it was enough for like a big mattress on the floor, a little bit more room than that, and then I had like a little stereo down there. And Kurt came down, and we smoked a little weed. He asked me at that point, like pretty quick, if I knew where to get any heroin, and I instantly said, I mean, I had been in a band with a heroin addict for 5 years off and on, Noxious Fumes and Subvert. And that instantly worried me. I never had heard Kurt speak the word heroin, ever. He asked me if I knew where to get any heroin. Instantly I was like, oh my, you're not shooting up, are you? And he said, no, I'm just smoking it. And it's interesting at this point, like, this is like one of the earliest, like my story is one of the earliest signals that anybody has documented that Kurt had been interested or doing heroin. So that's strange. I remember it's very vivid. So like, yeah, we were just, it was probably like 45 minutes just hanging out talking, and the conversation about record labels and their record deal, came up. At this point, I think Kurt was staying with Chris for a little bit. I don't remember like everywhere that he was staying right at that point. But I don't think I hadn't seen him in, it had been probably quite a few months at that point, or a few months, something like maybe 4 or 5 months or something like that. The last time that I saw him before that, I want to say would have been when I went and visited him when Dave was staying there, and Jennifer Finch was with Dave at that point there at that apartment, and that probably was around the last days that they lived there. So it was just probably a few months, like 3 or 4 months, something like that. Anyway, Kurt was talking about. See, I remember them saying DGC, not Geffen as much. And he was really happy. Well, on the whole heroin thing, I did not know where to get any heroin, and we just smoked some weed, and yeah, that was kind of like, Kurt said he just smoked heroin. And I guess to me, I didn't really know what to think. I was pretty naive. I stayed away from that stuff. I never did that stuff, ever. I was around band members that did, but I stayed away from it completely. But it seemed kind of weird, like, I look back at it now and I think like, I maybe like he had some trust in me that he knew. He might have even said at that time, don't say anything to anybody. I don't remember. I'm guessing because it's not something that I ever talked about until later. We could have very possibly said something like that, but I just don't remember if he did. Anyway, we talked about the record label or the record deal, and I remember saying to him, like, just don't get taken advantage of. I remember very specifically saying, being concerned that the label, because the whole Sub Pop thing also, those guys had talked in the previous years hanging out. I remember them not being always happy with Sub Pop and feeling like, they were not seeing visible details of their sales and any money and all that. I remember some conversation about that. So that was probably one of the things that sparked that conversation, just my inner concern that Nirvana may, the band could still get taken advantage of. But I remember Kurt being very, confident about the label. I mean, he was just like, no, man, it's definitely good. No, I mean, like he never been happier with the decision. He just seemed like so confident. And I had multiple conversations with Kurt about different record labels. And Chris, I mean, those guys had a lot. They had so many labels taking them out, whining and dining them. The whole deal. And it almost at one point, I mean, to me, it was like, I almost thought like, it almost sounds like they'll just stay with Sub Pop. But anyway, so we're hanging out, and I had just really gotten into the Beatles. So this is like, this is like freaking what, 19. So by 1990, I had just started to get into the Beatles. I know this is ridiculous, but I grew up in a house where it was John Denver, Helen Reddy, the Kingston Trio, the Irish Rovers. There was never anything that was very rock related. My brother and myself always had to find that stuff on our own. Anyway, so I was listening to Strawberry Fields. I was really into Strawberry Fields. Very like the more weird psychedelic Beatles stuff was the stuff I was the most interested in. And we were listening to it. So I played Strawberry Fields, and I played something for Kurt. I was explaining how I noticed that if I turned the balance all the way to one side, it was just horns and vocals. And if I turned the balance all the way to the other side, it was backwards cymbals, heavy drums and vocals. And I was explaining to him like one side with the horns and just the vocals made it sound way happier, almost like and angelic or something, and then you turn it to all the way to the other side, and it sounded like dark and heavy and ominous. And then Kurt told me about how they recorded, and I didn't know that. I'd never heard that before. Now it's it's for musicians that record, it's pretty, not anything that's too far out. I mean, like panning instruments when you record is not something that's far out. But I didn't realize that, and he explained to me that that's how they were able to they did more tracks by bouncing and panning. So Kurt was fully aware of I was like, wow, that was super cool. I mean, I got some inner info that I didn't know. I mean, Kurt most likely read a lot more than I think he was. I wouldn't be surprised if he read a whole lot. Also, I played the Machine demo. It's one that I posted not too long ago. It's the one that had Hymn of the Damned, and it was the last demo that we recorded. And I played that for Kurt, and he really liked it. He really liked like a couple of the songs on there for sure. He really liked Remember Yesterday and Hymn of the Damned. He always liked Machine, like whenever I played Machine for him, he always dug it. He was always sincerely thought it was cool and original. And what was interesting, his friend Matt, he was in a band called Comb. I'm sitting down there with Kurt. Matt comes in, knocks on the little door, opens the door. He says, "John, hey, I brought this tape for you." He hands me this tape, and it's a live bootleg recording of Nirvana in Chicago, and he hands it to me, and I'm like, "Oh, cool." And Kurt's sitting there with me, and Kurt may have I don't know, I don't remember what he said. I thought that was weird, So anyway, we were hanging out in the upstairs of the house. So that was in the basement, where that little room. I had another video where I actually went in the house before it sold again, and I was pointing out where the room used to be. So you can search for that video. And I tell this story in a shorter, quick version. Anyway, so we go upstairs and we're hanging out, and I remember, okay, I had a bunch of records. Most of the records were mine that were up there, if I remember right. And I had, like, down the street, House of Records, you were able to get, like, 10 cent, if they had scratches, they'd sell them for nothing. And Chris had played the Janis Joplin record, and Kurt picked out Master of Reality, Black Sabbath. And I don't remember what other. I just remember very specifically those two records we listened to. But I'm just sitting on the couch listening to Black Sabbath, Master of Reality, and very with Kurt, and just hanging out. Yeah, so that is part one. And part two will definitely get into more of the well, there's, I don't want to give anything away, but I know we haven't, that's just, I'm just going to consider this part one. So anyway, thanks for listening.